Good evening and welcome to the September 15th regular general meeting of Council. Chris is otherwise detained, so in my role as acting mayor, I will be chairing the meeting. First up is the adoption of the minutes. Minutes of the public hearing held September 3rd, 2014. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Lefebvre. Seconded by Councillor Powell. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And minutes of the council meeting held September 3rd, 2014. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Lefebvre. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And on to approval of the agenda. Do I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Neufeld. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Carried. And on to reports. Ms. Comas, could you please give us a background on the issue regarding 2014 fall grant and aid applications?
Yes, Your Worship. The Grant and Aid Select Committee met recently and reviewed the applications that we've received to date and are recommending grants be awarded to Haven Society, Oceanside Building Learning Together, Parksville Qualicum branch of the BCSPCA, Parksville Seniors Activity and Drop-In Center Society, Royal Canadian Legion Ladies Auxiliary, and the Vancouver Island Opera. And the recommendations are as per the report.
All right, looking for a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Neufeld, seconded by Councillor Lefebvre. Any discussion? Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question to the Grant and Aid Committee. I see we have a nice range of recipients for the fall grant and aids, but I just wanted to know, were these the only ones that submitted this fall?
Through Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. And to Councillor Powell-Davidson, the answer is yes. They were the only ones that submitted, and we used all of the budget allowable. I will be making a comment later, or could I make one now? Okay. If you, Your Honor, or Your Worship, I should say, thank you. We will be looking at, and we will be directing staff, at least I would hope the Council will, with respect to looking at the criteria for the grants and aid as to whether these, in fact, are supposed to be for specific events or projects as opposed to ongoing programs. And there are a number of things. We have decided to allow money to be distributed to Haven House, which is very much an ongoing program. And yet we looked at this and saw that there's a couple of possibilities as far as criteria are concerned. Most of the people that work for Haven House and are employed are outside of the residency requirements, and yet we don't know where we know the services are being provided within the city, and yet we don't know to whom the services are being provided. That may or may not be a criteria, maybe that's cutting it very finely, but some issue to look at as far as criteria are concerned. And as well as that, when there's the possibility of coordination of funding, does the RDN provide servicing as far as funding to this organization? And if so, should we be allowing funding as well? So it's a matter of double dipping. So I would respectfully submit that Council be directed to consider the criteria of how we actually specify the grants and aid.
Okay. Now, well, why don't we finish up with the current motion then, and then do you want to spring that up under new business, or just bring it up after this motion is cleared?
It can be done at the end of this discussion as a motion arising.
All right. Well, anybody have any other discussion on the current motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And so, Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. then I would move that, in fact, Council direct staff to look at the criteria for the actual dispensation of funds, looking at the whether it is specific events, specific projects, or ongoing projects that are allowable, the degree to which people have to be actually resident within the city, and how that becomes very fine as to what we look at there, and also to prevent double dipping so that we're not funding some situation that is also being funded by the RDN or some other granting institution. Thank you.
Seconder, was that clear enough for staff to go from there? All right, any discussion on the motion? Powell?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Neufeld, Haven Society does offer services in the city of Parksville, and they've been doing that for a number of years. I know from my daytime job that there are many women that access services through the Haven Society, and so it's not an out-of-town. And they're also in the process of acquiring a building for a transition home.
Councillor Neufeld?
If I could respond to that, then the criteria that I would like to have looked at is this funding grant and aid, the way that you look at it, is it for specific events and programs, or at least events and projects, or does it meant to include ongoing programs as well? And I would hope that staff would have a look at that.
Councillor Lefebvre?
Thank you, Councillor Neufeld. When Councillor Neufeld and I were, Councillor Morrison, when Councillor Neufeld and I were working on this project last week, we noted also that the policies were, vision date was 14 years ago. So perhaps also I might add that when staff are looking at this, they might want to check out with other municipalities or organizations that are similar grants and aid policies to see what specifically.
Councillor Powell-Davidson?
Thank you, Your Worship. In light of the fact that the information that Councillor Lefebvre just gave to us of how long it's been since we've reviewed this program, I'm thinking I might support it as well, but could I have the motion read again? I'm a little confused as to how directed it is. I would like it to be less directed and simply put forward to staff that we ask staff to review the program rather than giving them specifics to look at.
Ms. Comas?
Okay, that's council directs staff to examine the criteria for dispensation of funds through grant and aids, including specific events, ongoing projects, whether recipients have to be resident in Parksville, or whether the organization is receiving funds from alternate sources, and finally explore grant and aid policies in other jurisdictions.
Follow-up, please. Your Worship, to staff. Does that give some flexibility for reviewing the program as a whole, or does it direct us in a very specific direction? I'm looking to staff for a little guidance on that motion. I'm fine with the program being reviewed. I don't want changes to be made that could be detrimental to some of our very valuable programs here in the city, or some of our valuable organizations here in the city, albeit a small amount of money, but it does show that we support them.
Mr. Mayor?
If I may, Your Worship, those are the specific items that we'll look at, but we'll look at other items as well. Council also has to remember that this is your policy. You will be the one that's ultimately adopting whatever comes back. We'll just be giving you recommendations.
Satisfying? Any other discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. Mr. Russell, can you please give us some background on the issue regarding advisory design panel terms of reference update?
Sure, if I may, Your Worship. Basically, in order to ensure that architects and landscape architects in active practice are able to continue to participate in Parksville's advisory design panel, There is a need to update the terms of reference in line with some of the membership and appointment requirements of their respective organizations. Those organizations being the Architectural Institute of British Columbia and the British Columbia Society of Landscape Architects. Basically, a revised terms of reference is proposed. Some of the key changes proposed are basically a two-year term appointment versus the current appointment for the term of council. There's a change in the membership. Presently, there's a maximum of 6 members. What is proposed is rather that it be referred to a minimum of 5 members. The other change is that members who are members of either AIBC, who are architects, or the BCSLA, who are landscape architects, be selected from a list put forward by their societies. And the other proposed change is a general maximum of 3 terms.
All right, we have a recommendation in front of us. Mover for the recommendation, Councillor Powell-Davidson. Second, Councillor Powell. Discussion. Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. A comment first. I've been the council liaison to the advisory design panel for a couple of years now, and in this report there's an option about doing away with the ADP altogether, or the advisory design panel altogether, and I would highly recommend that this is a very valuable committee and that we do continue to keep it. Their job is basically to be the experts, to look at the form and the character, or the watchdogs, to ensure that the form and character of construction, new projects as well as facades, are adhered to what we've set out in the city of Parksville, and that and they see things that, you know, other people might miss, but because these are experts sitting on our panel. So I think this is a great program, I hope, or a great committee. I hope we continue with it. My question is, a few times we've had trouble making quorum because these are working professionals, and I was pleased to see the change from a minimum or maximum, maximum of 6 to minimum of 5. And I wonder if we have plans to expand that, the members to that committee. So I guess I'm asking staff through you, Your Worship. We've had trouble making quorum several times, and I would like to know if there are plans to expand the committee, or if this is the way to do it.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell-Davidson. Part of the reason to switching to a minimum component was so that we could more readily appoint additional members. We've also experienced some of the challenges of having small numbers on occasion. So by having a minimum number, I mean, we're somewhat, reliant upon how many membership apply each year. So with a minimum number, if we only have 5, we can proceed. However, if we get, 7 or 9 candidates, which are more the ideal kind of numbers, then we're in a position, council's in a position to make those.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I question the need for this panel simply because at one time we wanted to be able to move quicker with the DPs, and one suggestion was to eliminate that panel because it usually takes a considerable amount of time for them to meet because they don't have a quorum a lot of the times. And I got the information right from one of the architects on that panel for some time, and he didn't see the great value of it as well. So I question the fact whether we need it. And if we're trying to speed up DPs, I think we should consider maybe doing away with it. I don't know how important it is. And every time they've met on many occasions, they haven't got a quorum, and therefore they've got to put it over for another month, which holds up our process here. Just a question whether we should even consider having it or not. Thanks.
Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. One comment or 2 comments actually. Thank you. I'm glad to see that in the Schedule A that also a person or persons with expertise on the topic of accessibility or universal design can be included in the panel, because I think that becomes very, very important. This is a very embryonic stage of any kind of development, and I believe that people with that kind of knowledge, even though they may not be landscape architects or architects, they can still bring something to bear in terms of accessibility and inclusiveness. The other point I wanted to make with regards to something along the lines of Councillor Greer, I think that that the dollar amount becomes important too. I think that dollar amounts, I don't know, I don't want to propose a dollar amount tonight, but I would imagine that anything that's under $100,000 may not necessarily have to go to the advisory design panel, especially if it involves painting and some facade work and things like that. So I guess it becomes a question of perhaps before referring it to the advisory design panel, there could be some brief discussion about the exact type of work to be done so that it wouldn't slow things down, as Councillor Greer is suggesting. However, when the advisory design panel was created, it was a result of criticism by the community at large that we needed this kind of sober second thought, so I'll be supporting the recommendation.
Just before we move forward, if I'm not mistaken, the developer always has the option of bypassing the design panel, do they not?
If I may, Your Worship, through to yourself. With the revised terms of reference, it's really, someone has the right to seek council, direct council decision on the matter. The new policy is a bit clearer in that it doesn't preclude council from establishing, a further criteria. So, in the new year under new council, they would be in a position to establish the criteria that they wish to have applications when they go and when they don't go to the panel. The real intent of this right now is that come January, there's always a mad scramble to set up the design panel because their term will end in December. It was hoped by bringing terms of reference to council today that there'd be an opportunity to get the terms of reference in a satisfactory position so that should the future council decide that it wishes to proceed with the design panel, we have the tools in place to make that happen.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Actually, Councillor Powell Davidson was first.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support having the advisory design panel. I think that it was brought in because of concerns from residents. And I also think that maybe we're focusing on the wrong area. There's part of the policy that says their responsibilities, panel responsibilities and conduct, and maybe we should have a part in there that talks about commitment, and when we interview them for the position, have that question on the questioning panel, because I think that's what we're lacking in here is the commitment on that panel, and I think we should keep it.
So is that something you wanted to add to the current motion? Ms. Comas?
So if I understand it correctly, you want to include that in the interview process. That really doesn't have a place in the policy, but that would be more of an administrative matter.
All right, any other discussion? Councillor Powell Davidson?
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, just in regards to what Councillor Powell was saying, lost my train of thought. We are discussing the terms of reference here, not whether or not the panel should go forward. However, I do feel the need to respond to Councillor Greer. I disagree with you. I think that this panel helps to speed up the process because they do meet at least once a month as need be, and if a builder or developer has requested them to meet sooner than that, then that has been accommodated. So I see this panel as speeding up the process, not delaying it. I also would like to emphasize that we have other committees made up of experts and community members, and they look at important aspects that affect our city. I can't think of many more things more important than how our city looks, and that's the job of these experts. They're looking at what the form and character, what the end product is going to look like, and ultimately what our city will look like. I absolutely agree that we keep this. I know we're not debating that right now, but I'd like to thank staff for the work that they've put into this terms of reference, and I definitely will be supporting it.
Thank you. Ultimately, it is up for debate, because if they want that to happen, they would have to defeat this motion, so it's relevant to discuss that as well. Councillor Neufeld?
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I mean, one of the things that is an option that was put forward by Mr. Russell is that there's a possibility of rescinding the terms of reference, which would, in his opinion, according to the report, provide an improved timeline of approximately 4 to 6 weeks in any form of character and revitalization development permit. So I'm not sure whether it would be beneficial for the city, beneficial for the developer. I think that it's sort of a wash. At this point, the developer, should he choose to come forward, could say, or the proposer could come forward and come directly to council, as opposed to, as you mentioned before, as opposed to going to an ADP. So if we leave it the way it is, it's fine. But in fact, they have the option themselves of cutting down on the timeline. And that being the case, let's continue to have the process. If they choose not to use it, then the hammer may be on their head. But let's go forward with it as the way it is.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Call the question then. All's in favor? Opposed? Carried. And Mr. Russell, can you please give us the background on the following issue regarding second follow-up report, consideration of an application to facilitate an affordable housing development for the Kingsley Low Rental Housing Society at 312 Hearst Avenue?
If I may, Your Worship, so this is a follow-up report for the rezoning application for Kingsley Manor, rezoning the subject property at 312 Hearst Avenue from single-family residential to a comprehensive development zone to facilitate 28 units in a 3-story building. Referrals were made to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and to the Regional District of Nanaimo with respect to the proposed bylaw amendments. No comments or concerns were received from either jurisdiction. In addition, the applicant held a public open house on August the 19th, 2014 from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. in the clubhouse at 280 Molliette Street. Notice of the event was mailed to surrounding neighbors of the subject property on August the 2nd and on August the 14th, on August the 14th and August the 19th edition of the Parksville Qualicum Beach News advertisements of the event were also posted. The applicant has submitted a sign-in sheet with indicating that 27 people were in attendance. The applicant has submitted 6 comment sheets collected as a result of the open house and 2 correspondence that appear to predate the event.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. You have a rather lengthy 6-part recommendation in front of you. Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Greer. Discussion. Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have 2 questions. The first one is in regards to a letter that was submitted, and you'll find it on page 44 and 45 of the package. Well, there are some items in here that I feel the letter writer needed some clarification on. There's a couple of concerns that I feel are quite worth looking at, and I just wanted to go through the staff, if I may. The section that says balconies facing the strata, I beg your pardon, that's not the part I wanted to look at. Where there be balconies facing the strata complex will be, that's the part, yes, will be quite visible. These balconies can at times become unsightly storage areas. Will there be any regulations governing this? I just want to know, storage areas on balconies, would that not be considered a fire hazard?
But that's through the chief.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell-Davidson, it would, I think it would have to depend on the building code and how it's interpreted in that section. There could well be storage areas put on balconies that do meet the building code requirements for fire separation and that, so we'd have to look into that further.
I think ultimately it would come down to the building better manager itself. I would assume, based on Huswick Place, it looks quite nice up there. They would have some regulations regarding that. But this can all come up at the public hearing that this would ultimately come back to, where the proponent would have a chance to.
And a follow-up, if I may.
Go ahead.
My question is pertaining to page 65, which is the information that's included in our package regarding the reading that comes at the end of our meeting, but it's appropriate, I think, to ask this question now, if I may. You notice on page 65 it makes reference to parking, off-street parking and loading, and I see 28 parking spaces, standard parking spaces, small car, handicap, so forth. I just am querying through you, Your Worship, to staff, do any of those parking spaces include scooter parking? I would imagine there would be a few people possibly moving into this facility that might use scooters or, you know, the Mobies or whatever they're called to get around. And we have seen that in other developments where there was specific parking to scooters.
Russell?
If I may, Worship, through to Councillor Powell Davidson, these establish minimum parking requirements for vehicles. It doesn't mean that someone couldn't instead park a scooter within that space. But the bylaw basically establishes the minimum parameters for vehicles. Somewhere else on the site or within one of those parking spaces, if the opponent so chose, they could accommodate types of devices, same way they could accommodate bicycles. Or
Any other discussion? Councillor Neufeld?
Thanks very much, Your Worship. There was one comment on that same letter that Councillor Powell Davidson referred to. That's on page 44, the second bullet down from, third bullet up from the bottom, referring to the fact that our understanding is that the building in question must be at least 6 meters from the property lines. In fact, I don't think they are. I think that was incorrect. I don't know if the individual is aware of it, but I believe it's 4.2 meters is the setback on the side, particularly to the Avon strata. I don't know if they're aware of it. Was there any great concern, Worship, to Mr. Russell as to the siting of that building?
Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Neufeld, I'm not sure I'm in position to answer that. The comments collected were provided by the applicant. Council will have an opportunity at the public hearing to hear any other input on the development. I can clarify what the bylaw says. The bylaw has a setback of 6 meters from the wall face of the building. However, it does have a provision for unenclosed balconies that allows them to be 4.2 meters away from the property line. Other than that, in the comments that are collected as part of this report, I'm not in a position to advise further.
Clarify that. Any other discussion? Call the questions. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Mr. Banks, can you please give us the background on the issue regarding the offer to purchase the 1990 Spartan fire truck?
Thank you, Your Worship. We received an offer to purchase the 1990 Spartan apparatus that became surplus after we received delivery of our latest truck in May of this year. This truck is surplus to our needs at this time, and it's been advertised for sale on a couple different websites and around locally. So to date, this is the first offer that we've had for the purchase of it.
All right, and we have a recommendation on the agenda. Moved by Councillor Powell Davidson, second by Councillor Powell. Any discussion regarding? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions to the Chief. We seem to sell these fire trucks for, I think the last 2 or 3 we've sold is $30,000. That seems to be a set price for used fire trucks. When we go to buy a fire truck, it's like $500,000 to $1 million. and we seem to be forced into buying those trucks at that price because of insurance. Does Bella Coola not have any kind of insurance problems buying a $30,000 truck?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Greer, I spoke with the fire chief up there and the director of Public Works. They're in a position where they have a neighboring department with a first-line apparatus, so they felt they didn't need to have a first-line truck because they have an agreement with their neighbor. If it's the Indian van that's right beside them there, and so this truck will suit their needs. They've checked into it and they're happy with making the offer.
And their insurance is okay with it?
They were happy with the offer. I left it at that.
Thanks.
All right. Any other discussion? Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I had the same conversation with Chief Banks before the meeting commenced, and I did not tell him, and I will make it known now. I have a cousin, actually, that is a chief in Aurora, Ontario, and we wound up going through a discussion basically looking at fire trucks and utility vehicles and this type of thing. And it's a case that I would think that this would be a vehicle that we should be keeping ourselves. I think this is a vehicle that we can make use of. I think it's we would have to look at where we would store it, how we would use it, but I think that it is a valuable piece of equipment that, in fact, we loaned to Dashwood recently, and serve their needs. I think that it is a backup vehicle, and I think that for the amount of cost, the $30,000, we're going to get very little return out of a $500,000 truck. And I'm saying for the amount of cost that would be involved as far as loss on $30,000, it would be best that we kept it ourselves.
Comments? My only feedback on that would be then we'd have to look at maintenance costs as well as storage costs, I would assume, on that truck, which I would assume are mounting, whereas we can enable another fire establishment to have the protection they need at a reasonable cost.
That's correct. There would be, Your Worship, there would be ongoing maintenance costs. They would be annual pump servicing on that is probably $1,000 a year. Pump testing, we're probably looking at the maintenance costs somewhere in the neighborhood of about $5,000 a year, and then fuel and insurance and that goes along with it. And a place to store it would be the difficult thing right now. We have no room at the hall to put an extra piece of apparatus at this time. Right now, the truck is sitting outside at Public Works, and to have it sit out over the winter and then be pressed into service would be hard on the equipment.
Thank you, Chief. Seeing no further questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have one bylaw second reading tonight. Housing Agreement Bylaw Authorization Bylaw 2014 number 1510. Do I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Greer. Any discussion? Favor? Opposed? That's carried. And we have two bylaws for second reading and advancement to public hearing tonight. Planned Parksville Amendment Bylaw 2014 number 1492.1 and Zoning Development Amendment Bylaw 2014 number 2000.95. Mover and seconder for the recommendation, Councillor Lefebvre, Councillor Powell Davidson. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And we have one bylaw for third reading tonight, Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2014 number 2000.94. Do I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Powell Davidson, Councillor Powell. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, flying through the agenda. Does any member of council have any new business? Fancy reading notes. All right, go back to the agenda. We do have a motion for final adoption. Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2014, number 2000.93. I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation. Councillor Powell Davidson and Councillor Lefebvre. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now we'll go back to new business. Does any member of council have any new business? Councillor Powell Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had a very, very busy week last week, so I'll scoot through it. Monday, I attended the Oceanside Homelessness Task Force as Council Liaison Alternate, and I was very pleased to hear that some funding had been secured by the task force, so we will finally be getting a part-time outreach program as well as rental subsidies for 5 people, so that was good news. Last council meeting, council will recall that Councillor Powell, the actual council liaison to that group, made reference to the homelessness week, and she talked about the sleep outside night. I don't recall us getting information. The very next day will be a health fair, and so this is a very unique event where people who are living in a homeless situation will be able to go to the health fair and get the one-stop shopping for all the services that they're going to need. So the task force has really stepped it up this year for participating in Homeless Week. I just want to report on that. Tuesday, I attended a meeting with members of the Ministry of Transportation, and I did a little bit of a report and sent it out to staff, so you, or pardon me, out to council, so you had a look at that. There were some really key points that stood out for me on that meeting. One that the whole meeting was as an effort to work towards a 10-year strategic plan that the Premier had wanted to see put together, and Vancouver Island was the only region in the province that was participating in these roundtable discussions. So whilst I kind of went to that meeting armed with, it's Vancouver Island's time for a little bit of attention, obviously the decision was already made, and that's why we were having these meetings. One of the other big points that came out of that meeting was the ministry was asking communities on Vancouver Island to send your business cases, send your asks if you would. They're meeting with communities all over Vancouver Island, and we all know our area, we know what's needed. So we talked about the big picture items such as the highways. One discussion that was brought up was the lack of pullouts for big trucks that are driving through our area. So, they're just pulling off the side of roads. So, we're looking at safety issues with that. One of the things that I brought up was in regards to emergency preparedness and what the Ministry of Transportation had in place in the event of a big disaster. And it was really interesting to hear that they actually had some, I don't think they used the word portable, but you'll get the picture, bridges in storage that should we lose our bridges, these things are there to go. They also have some big barges that don't need docks to land. So there was a lot of information discussed. We were joined by members of the Qualicum Beach Council and also the Lanceville Council. I ask you to refer to your full report if you want more information. On Wednesday, I attended the Vancouver Island Tourism Association's annual gala, and I was really pleased to see two awards go to the area. Robert Held is an artist that some of you might recall. He has a glass blowing shop down in the Orange Bridge district, and he won an award. And also Parksville Resort Drive Community won an award for their powers and it's the Power of Partners Award. Friday, I attended the campaign session that our staff has put together. This was the second of 2, and I just want to put a shout out to our staff for doing that, because it's a great idea. We have people who are thinking about running. They don't know what's involved, and our staff put a lot of work into preparing this to help potential candidates. But one of the key things that I got out of this is that other communities don't seem to be doing that. So we were joined by other people, possibly running in other communities, and we're all partners in this regional district. So I was really pleased, and I just wanted to say thank you to the staff for doing that.
All right, any other members of council with new business? All right, I just had one. I took my dog Max down to the community park for the SPCA Pause for a Cause walk. They raised about $8,800, had a really nice turnout around the beach, a couple of laps up and down the boardwalk, so it was really quite nice. And I don't know whether the voting is still open or not for the Open for Business BC. I know Parksville was nominated as 1 of 10. There is no voting? That's just, correct? No, that was the community park one, I believe. The other one is just there was nominations and it's voted on by the UBCM. Okay. We were voted as one of the top 10 in BC Open Business because of our partnerships with the Chamber of Commerce and the different, sorry, putting you on the spot.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Open for Business Award, we submitted a nomination, and it's a $10,000 award. If we're successful, it would go towards economic development in partnership with the Parksville Chamber and their initiatives. And so it's not voting. It's up for selection by the Ministry, I believe, of Community Development, I think.
Thank you. I was getting muddled with that one and the community park vote that we have. Currently, that's still open at the moment, is it not?
That's still open, I think, for another week.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was remiss in recognizing this. The annual fantasy auction is coming up for the Chamber of Commerce, and once again, the City of Parksville is going to be donating. We had quite a creative idea this year, and we're creating $300 worth of gift certificates from all the merchants in downtown. So it's it's going to be $20 gift certificates, but and it's Arts Cafe, British Bobby Restaurant, Farmhouse Restaurant. There's a whole list of them, and I think that's indicative of how we want our business community to grow. And I would like to thank Councillor Peter Morrison because it was his great. I need to make a motion that the city contributes $300 towards a Bon Appetit to the City of Parksville auction package for the 30th Annual Parksville Chamber of Commerce Fantasy Auction, and that the funding be provided from the Council contingency. That.
All right. Seconded by Councillor Powell Davidson. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. All right, and pursuant to Section 90 of the Community Charter, Council needs to proceed to a closed meeting to consider items related to personal information and identifiable individuals and labor relations. Can I get a mover? Councillor Lefebvre, seconder. Councillor Powell Davidson. All those in favor?